All right. Well, in the interest of time, I think that we will get started. Um, so good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Through our virtual programs, we have the opportunity to shine a light on PCDS alumni who are out in the world doing really interesting and important things with their lives. And tonight we are delighted to feature author Sarah Humphrey. Sarah is a 2016 graduate of PCDS and a 2020 graduate of the University of San Diego, where she received her degree in international business and communications. She now lives in New York, where she is a copywriter at Vayner NFT. Pretty Young, here is her debut book. Sarah, as the mother of two young daughters, I can't tell you how much I appreciated your insights and honesty and the takeaway of how I should always remind them that they are enough. I will carry that takeaway with me for a long time. Sarah, I'm going to hand over the floor to you, and then alumni board member Stephanie Hackett will facilitate the Q&A portion of the program for all of our attendees. If you have questions for Sarah, please post them in the chat function on your Zoom webinar below, and we will make sure to address them. So without further ado, I welcome you, Sarah.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Sarah, and I'm the author of Pretty Young. And a lot of people ask me, why did you write this book? And there's a lot of questions, but one good reason why I wrote this book was we were in the middle of the pandemic. My friend came to me and said, I think you should write a book. And I was telling, I think before everyone got on this Zoom, I also mentioned to Leslie and stuff that I'm impulsive and I kind of like to be a little bit of an overachiever. So without much thought, I entered myself in a program and started to write this book Pretty Young. And it took about, I would say, 9 months to come into fruition. And it's finally here. It's right here. And then the book you see, or the book you can see on Amazon, has a different cover, but it's essentially the same exact thing. But the main reason why I did really want to write this book and was inspired to write it was because I wanted to capture my thoughts in the moment. I am a big self-help guru. I just go on Amazon, honestly, and look on the best like sellers and all of the like self-help ones. And I notice they're all great, but I notice they're usually written by people who are older, probably late into their like 50s, 60s, which obviously there's so much wisdom there. But on the contrary, there's not many books written by 23-year-olds capturing what exactly they're experiencing in life. And as we know, technology has completely changed the world in the past, even like 10 years, and definitely in the past 30 years. So that's another reason why I really wanted to capture what I was feeling in a book that I could potentially pass down to, you know, my friends, my children, potentially maybe one day as well. And also, I think there's something beautiful about kind of challenging yourself and learning and creating and making mistakes as well. I think a lot of times people have come up to me and asked me, oh, how much money are you making from this? Or what's like the monetary gain that you're like, all of those kinds of questions. And for me, it wasn't ever about that. It was more so, how can I help someone? Because at the end of the day, like I said, I was 23 when I wrote this, currently 25. And my kind of philosophy behind this is, if I can help one person, one woman with my story and the other stories that I have in this book, that's honestly like I've done my job. So I plan to write more books, but that's basically my why of why I wrote this book. And so throughout this book, I talk about culture, gender issues, mental health, and entrepreneurship specifically. And those are the things I'll mostly be covering tonight. But I think transparency and vulnerability are super important. And kind of throughout this book, that's like what you'll see, a common theme. So let's get into it. So my first section of the book, I cover a lot about culture. And obviously culture plays a big impact in our society as a whole, especially in the US, where we're just a giant melting pot. A lot of people have mixed backgrounds, and it can be really tricky, especially as a woman in modern day America, when you have these cultural backgrounds that your family instills in you when you're growing up, but then you're also face the rest of the world, like when you're in school and you have a lot of other influences, and it can be very tricky kind of navigating life from a cultural lens. And so I actually interviewed one of my good friends here in the city. Her name's Lauren Lapid. She's a Filipino American, and she really wanted to be an artist. She just was very creative, and she was also a rock star athlete, but her family and her parents specifically really wanted her to be a doctor or a lawyer. And there was a lot of tension, and this caused a lot of strife between her and her parents, and a lot of mental strain on Lauren as well. Luckily, all is well in terms of her story. She landed a job at Condé Nast, and her family finally was able to kind of turn around, see the other side, and really cheer her on. But that being said, these cultural ideologies and beliefs do really affect women. So I'm going to read a bit of my book on page, if you have a book by chance, on page 37, kind of midway through the second paragraph. So whether you come from a white, Black, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, or mixed background, certain cultural ideologies and beliefs were presented to you from a young age and have shaped what you believe you can or cannot do in your life. I personally know many other friends who have fought hard to keep their dream of being a public health worker or filmmaker alive, despite what their parents and cultural norms desired for them, merely because they are women. For Dinah Cowker, a mental health reporter in the state news, growing up as a young woman in an Indian household had a slew of challenges, from expectations around marriage, appearances, and careers. Dinah struggled with the cultural pressures placed upon her. She struggled with the idea that she was meant to be someone else's wife, and the idea that she had to pursue a career that was practical to be successful. Navigating her own cultural pressures caused her to redefine herself by her own standards rather than purely a cultural one. So I think a lot of times this cultural, a lot of cultural ideologies and beliefs, which what I wanted to capture in this book, cause a lot of mental strain. And I talk a lot through Pretty Young that redefining yourself as a woman is super important, because otherwise you're going to be listening to what the rest of the world says. And I think that really causes a lot of strain on our mental, emotional health. And also, there was a psychologist, Dr. Andrews. She said that we should be aware of the cultural inconsistencies of how we treat boys and girls and the messages we are sending to our daughters. I think just a lot of times we don't really talk about it as much. We chat about it, especially in the workplace after you graduate school, pay discrepancies between women and men. But I think growing up, we don't really instill in our children, whether boys and girls, that they have, that we kind of put these cultural differences on them. I think they just kind of grow up, and then one day when you're 25 working, you realize, and you can see it in the workplace, oh, there's now these cultural differences of how we treat men and women. But I think growing up, we normalized this treatment. So I think that was just one thing I really wanted to bring to light in this section of my book, and kind of help younger women understand that and grasp that, and really advocate for themselves in this area. And another section of my book, I really focus on sexuality, and specifically the sexualization of women. And it's no secret that we live in a very sexualized society. You can watch the Super Bowl, it's a great example. You will see all of those, kind of quote unquote sexy commercials that definitely are not appropriate, but we're socialized to think that, they are. And I could go on a whole rant for this one, but I will keep it shorter. And one issue with like the sexualization of women specifically too, I've found, and I know so many other people, including my friends, there's really no roadmap between going from like girlhood to womanhood. I think it's very much, we have to navigate it. It's a very personal journey. And obviously, our parents and teachers and our leaders just, they do their best to help us navigate this area. But at the end of the day, this is a very personal experience. And obviously, culture has to do a lot with this. And I think a lot of the main questions, especially I faced kind of going from even high school to college, because PCDS, I loved PCDS, but it is very much of a bubble. And that's such a blessing because we're able to really focus on like who we are academically. But I think also when you kind of go, I mean, this is my personal experience, but when you go off to college, you have this whole new world where you're discovering aspects of yourself that you didn't really have to confront ever. So I would like to read a section from my book again on page 87. It is at the top of the first page. So it's safe to say we live in a highly sexualized society, from Carl's Jr.'s television commercials to provocative billboard ads. Women especially have been painted as these sexy, provocative, and sultry babes for the sake of marketing. When I was around the age of 8 years old, I would spend hours on end flipping through Tiger Beat and J14 magazine, which I honestly don't think exist anymore. Both predominant teen magazines at the time, and would see images upon images of stick-thin actresses and models wearing little to nothing when at the grocery store and the red carpet. These teen celebrities were publicized as sexual beings when in reality, many were still minors. So I think media especially, I mean, media does a lot of things to, our mental health, but I think especially for women. I remember when Instagram initially came out, I think 14 years old, and no one really knew what it was. No parent knew what it was. No child knew what it was. All we knew was that all of a sudden we had access to people's essentially photo galleries. And I think a lot of that also just, you had access to a lot of things that maybe you shouldn't have access to in terms of just the type of content. I don't think it was very monitored at the time. I know now Instagram has like evolved into something kind of different than what it was, but a lot of times I remember just seeing girls in stick skinny, just looking very, very thin and thinking, oh, I have to be that skinny. And I know a lot of other girls have experienced that in terms of body image too. And, oh, I have to wear a skimpy bikini because that's what's cute and cool. And when I would go through the magazines, like I said, when I was even younger than that, before social media and Instagram, I would see what Paris Hilton was wearing or Britney Spears. And I remember thinking, oh, that's how I'm supposed to look. When in reality, I'm realizing the pictures that I saw of them, they were, I think, probably like 18, I think probably 17, honestly. So they were minors. And I think it's just a really good reminder to be very cognizant as women. I think we need to do a better job at teaching, especially, I would say, like our high school aged girls, to understand what sexuality means and understand like the sexualization of women. We need to teach both our girls and boys that too, because I think it's not just like a one size fits all. I think when you just kind of shove everything into, oh, this is only information women need to know, and this is only information men need to know, I think that's when a lot of issues arise. So that's one thing I'm very passionate about is, I mean, obviously I'm a very big feminist. Equality among all is a big value of mine, but I think that is just one thing that is super important. And I hope that as society, as we kind of evolve, that we begin to have those conversations early and earlier, because I think it's so vital. We have access to so much technology now at a younger and younger age. that you're going to have to start bringing up those conversations sooner. And I think it's for the better. So that being said, I also talk a lot about mental health. I'm a big mental health advocate. I think confidence and validation, which I wrote a lot about, and vulnerability are big components of having great mental health. And so validation is for parking. That is one of the chapter titles of my book, and I actually heard it on a podcast. I forget specifically what podcast, but it was said by Allison Bird. She is like a manifest teacher, coach, I believe that's what her job is. But when she said validation for parking, I don't know why, it just kind of made a light bulb go off in my head, because so often I think we seek validation, especially women and men. Obviously, I'm not going to discriminate here, but we all do. We all seek validation, external validation specifically, whether it be our job, trying to get that test score, trying to get into that grad school, and or especially, our family too. That's such a big component as well. And so I've kind of noticed how it has really affected my personal mental health when I was trying to seek validation from outside myself versus within. So I'd love to read a paragraph. It's on page 144. Let me find it real quick. Perfect. So it's at the bottom. And I also talk a lot about my favorite book, Untamed by Glennon Doyle. This, I quote her a little bit, but it's an amazing book. Also, side note, you should definitely read it if you have not. But so here it is. In her nationally acclaimed bestseller, Untamed, Glennon Doyle touches on the fact that women are taught to abandon themselves and seek validation, particularly from men. She says the epitome of womanhood is to lose oneself completely. We forget our passion, forget our purpose, fall into a life that others think is acceptable. We let a piece of ourselves die to fit the expectations of others in fear of what they might think. We turn to vices and fill the voids we created to fill ourselves. We turn to booze and boys, drugs and people, overstimulation and external validation. We begin to believe this external validation will bring peace, when in actuality, it brings chaos. We are so quick to abandon ourselves if that means someone will give us their thoughts and opinions in exchange. It's become transactional. In this transaction, we lose something so vital to our very being, our future. So I think the point that I was trying to get across specifically also in this chapter was validation, I think, is honestly, or the lack of validation that we receive, we allow it to become detrimental to our dreams. I'm very much a person, I love intuition. That's just, I think I'm like an some on the personality, I forget exactly what it is, but I have very big intuition, and I'm very much a gut feeler. So intuition, especially like with dreams and everything, and when you're little, you say, oh, I want to be a doctor, but someone, says, no, that's not going to happen. We let that kill our dreams, and we let that kill our future, and we essentially allow people to dictate exactly how they think we should live our life. And also wanted to read too a little bit of my relationship with validation. And I say, my relationship with and need for validation has been quite a funny one. There are days when I feel on top of the world, feeling fully confident in my skin and looking for no source of external validation, but from myself. But on the contrary, there are days and weeks where I'm riddled with self-doubt and seeking any and every kind of validation I can find. So it's obviously very human to seek validation, but one thing I've learned and have just research from different psychologists is that the art of self-soothing and self-validation are very key. As we are as we grow up, obviously in say preschool, elementary school, even middle school, we receive a lot of validation from our teachers and parents. We get those participation stars, which obviously I loved. And we, get all of these kind of like accolades, which is great. But also I think there's a point where as we're growing up, we don't realize that we need to turn that external validation into like more of an internal validation. And I state that we are never taught to give ourselves permission before anyone else gives us that permission in return. Therefore, cultivating the right mindset around self-validation as women is critical to our overall mental and emotional well-being. So, how do you actually self-validate? That is the question. And in reality, obviously, there are many ways you can talk to different psychologists on exactly how to do this, but the main idea behind this is self-talk and internal dialogue. And a lot of people don't have very good internal dialogue. I was actually listening to a podcast a while back, and I think his name is Dr. Amen. I absolutely love him. He's a great psychologist and psychiatrist. And he said that about 90% of our thoughts are from the thoughts from the day before, and about 80% of them are negative. And that, when I heard that, was very frightening, because obviously you can go around thinking you're a positive person, but a lot of people don't actually sit with themselves and kind of understand, okay, what am I actually thinking? What am I feeling? And there's this whole, I'm very much also into holistic health, but the mind body experience too, how you think also is reflected and shows up in kind of your physiology. So one way is to obviously create an internal dialogue. And by creating an internal dialogue, you're going to be able to rewire your brain. And if you have ever read Atomic Habits, you might be kind of familiar with what I'm talking about. But it really helps you to reshape your thinking and reshape your thoughts. And also that leads to building confidence and validating yourself. So that was one thing I really picked up and I've learned over the past, I would say like 5 years since college and onwards. I think that is one thing that's really changed my mental health and emotional well-being, is to learning to self-validate and understanding that I can't gain confidence from anywhere but myself, and giving that to myself. And then going on from that, entrepreneurship, obviously, a lot kind of intertwines with confidence and being a female leader. And I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. One day I hope to own my own company, but it's no secret that we need more women leaders, especially in business. And the question I kind of came across when I was writing my book was, why aren't there any more women leaders? I think if I remember correctly, it's about less than 10% of CEOs in Fortune 500, companies are women. So that's a very daunting and scary fact. And obviously would love to see more women in business. But one thing I came across in my research was, first off, there's this thing called male hubris, female humility effect. So this was kind of deemed by psychologists, but basically men tend to be more overconfident and women tend to be very humble. So if there is a job and say a man applies for it, but he feels 60%, only 60% applicable, like all of the job description, he feels like he fills up 60% of it. And then the other 40%, he feels like he can learn. So he's still going to apply to that job. A woman, on the other hand, though, for most of the time, obviously there's variations, but for most of the time, a lot of women, unless they don't feel 100% like they fit the job description, they will not apply for the job, which obviously that goes back to confidence and humility. And, men tend to be overconfident, like the research says, but that is one huge factor. And then another factor is, just from what I've seen, is the word no has become so much a part of our vernacular as women. We hear no all the time. And so I wanted to read a paragraph on, let me see, 153 at the bottom. And I kind of just talk about my thoughts in terms of women hearing no and how it affects us mentally and emotionally, and how it affects us as we show up in business. So I think as women, we're always being told no in some form or capacity. No to dressing in a certain way, no to starting your own business, no to being a working mom, no to standing up for ourselves. And no has become a part of our auditory vernacular. Sarah Blakely, who I write a lot about in this book, she's honestly an inspiration, initially struggles to launch her business in a male-dominated field, are not quite unique by any means. Men dominate the entrepreneurial field tenfold. And according to a study done by Columbia Business School back in 2019, female-led ventures are 63% less likely to receive venture capital funding. And then in a similar study, 24% of women don't think they'll ever receive equal access to capital. And if you look overall at the chance of someone starting a company, it turns out that gender is a really strong predictor of whether or not they will become an entrepreneur. Women are less likely to be entrepreneurs than men, and this has been a big puzzle because women are just as inventive as men, and companies run by women are just as successful. So why aren't women launching companies at the same rate? And my conclusion personally, obviously, there are so many different factors that kind of intertwine, but it's lack of confidence, societal pressures, cultural pressures, and gender norms. But I think one major thing that women really trip up over is perfectionism. I think women are really taught to be perfectionists in some way, shape, or form, unfortunately. And I mentioned, I think women get caught up in being perfect, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect friend. Women of any age can become so engulfed in living a life pleasing to others that we forget our own dreams we once had so long ago. So that's just a little bit about what I wrote in terms of being an entrepreneur. And that's one kind of area of life as I kind of go down in my career that I really hope to, break some glass ceilings in terms of that. And in terms of like when I become a manager, and even the women I work around, really instill in them the confidence that they're able to pursue anything in business and, even in their personal life that they really want. And I think that's what we need to do as both women and men, create culture where we encourage others to, break those glass ceilings and go after what they want, and always make people feel seen and heard in both, a personal setting and in a workplace environment, I think is super important. So that is just a little bit about what I wrote. I covered a lot of bases in, I guess, 190 pages, but I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I know, Steph, you have a few questions for me too.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. I really loved the book and loved the areas that you highlighted. I guess I'm a nerd, but I was like underlining as I was reading it, and some of the passages you read, I had, starred and underlined myself because they just struck a chord with me as well. And also your book was so, I felt, timely in terms of the range of issues you covered. I mean, you packed a lot into it, but everything from mental health and feelings of isolation, the impact of social media, obviously women's rights and reproductive freedom, which is obviously, a hot button currently. You talked about lack of medically accurate sex education at a time when legislatures, including in Arizona, are banning. So I thought it was just really, really timely, and like sort of like prescient or something, or you had real intuition, I guess, about what what were important topics. So one question I have is, you dedicated your book to your future daughters, and then in the acknowledgments, you thanked your parents for unconditional love. I'm raising 3 daughters. Leslie, I know, is raising 2 daughters. And, I've seen with my own daughters the change, they're young and they're so bold and fierce and confident and sassy, and just fiery. And then and has as much confidence as boys. And then they go, and you talked about this in the book, and then as they enter those tween years, something kind of shifts and their confidence starts to decrease. And then as you talk, and the research all supports that, and you can see it as it's happening, no matter what kind of a feminist, no matter how much you think you're trying to instill confidence in them. And then, as you mentioned, in the workplace, then women, men are not only just more confident, but like overconfident versus their qualifications, and women are underconfident, like underselling themselves. And so I guess my question is, what do you think, what would you recommend for parents, like how to instill this? I think we think we're doing it, but I'm like such a boring feminist, and I'm always trying to instill all this, and in my son as well. But you still see it happening. So I guess I'm curious, what would be your advice to parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this also has to be a part of, our school curriculum too. It can't just be at home, because also, depending on, your family dynamic, I think sometimes it isn't instilled necessarily. Confidence isn't very key for some people to instill at home. So I think also the main thing for me personally, I would say, is having like great teachers too, because at the end of the day, you're spending at least for me, I was a swimmer, so I would honestly spend time at school from like 5:30 till 5:30 at 5:30 in the morning till 5:30 at night. So 12 hours a day I'm there. So I think school has such a big impact, and like your teachers who you interact with have such a big impact on your confidence, instilling the quality. And I know especially so many teachers that I've had at PCS, they did a great job at that too. And obviously, like, no one goes unscathed in life in terms of trying to navigate this issue. But I would say just constantly reminding your students that they are capable, and even like including that in, I know like we had like YO in middle school, and like I think we called it the real world. I'm not sure what they call it anymore, but it's essentially YO for high school. I think instilling that and like bringing like mental kind of like mindfulness too into a lot of work. I think a lot of times we think that it's like more woo woo or like meditation, but I think it has like a really great place for just overall confidence and mental well-being.
That's great advice. And I think, the school is actually doing that, now that you said they still have YO and the real in middle school and real world in the high school. They're adding a second counselor in the high school. They added a counselor in the lower school this past year. So I think there really is a big focus on that. They do mindfulness, starting in lower school. So I think there really is, more awareness. And I know Jenny Treadway, she put in the chat and is in the audience, was talking about how we can better work with our female students to find their voice and have them feel not silenced, which you talk about a lot, whether it's by others or silencing yourself because of that, lack of validation or, of internal validation. So those are good insights.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, how we could really support our female students in finding their voice, I know that a lot of times, at least for me, I was so caught up and intimidated by what others thought of me. So I think really instilling the fact that that honestly, at the end of the day, like you should really only focus on, and it's a skill that's learned. I don't think like you're going to fully grasp this. I mean, maybe some people will, but you're not going to fully grasp this in high school, because I feel like that's like the point of high school is you're trying to figure out how to grasp like self-confidence and learn all of that. But I think really also helping teach everyone that confidence does come within, like I kind of talked about earlier, and mindfulness, and really just saying if someone's going to make fun of you for saying something, which luckily PCS was a great space compared to definitely like other public high schools. Obviously, I didn't go to a public high school, went to PCS, but I've heard horror stories, and I was always thankful. I was like, oh, thank God, because people can really express themselves. So I think it's like a very special school, but even to support them even more, I think a lot of times is just, I think going back to faculty really telling, especially the women, obviously the guys have a lot of confidence already, and is it true confidence? That can be up for debate another time, but yeah, I think just really focusing on the women and uplifting them and creating an environment where they feel seen and heard, and no question is a stupid question too, because I think a lot of times girls, especially like I did, I felt like I had stupid questions. In reality, there is no stupid question.
Yeah, it's interesting. You quoted a lot from Glennon, Doyle, and I don't know if you happened to see Abby Wambach's speech at Loyola Marymount that's gone viral.
I saw the first 30 seconds and then I got distracted, so I need to see it though.
But she talks about even Abby Wambach, sitting at a table, with big deal people and wanting to speak to something that she particularly knows about, and a man starts chiming in, and it's about women in sports, and she and Serena Williams are sitting at the table, and before they can speak, this NFL quarterback starts yammering on about it, and so she was kicking herself for not interjecting sooner, for not speaking up. So it is like even these people who we feel like are so strong and so bold and outspoken struggle with it. So like how do us normal people, yeah.
Also just comes down to remembering that you can add value. Like everyone has something to say, and it doesn't matter who you are, and it can be big or small, but everyone has something to say and can add value. And I mean, like Leslie mentioned earlier, I work for crypto. I did not know anything about crypto earlier, like 6 months ago. And now I'm, in meetings with some bigwig people, and I'm trying my best. And sometimes I still get nervous. I mean, I do get nervous. I was in a meeting today even, and I was like, what am I saying? But I think it's really just practice makes perfect too. Like if you speak up once and you don't do well, then you try again. And it's just a muscle too at the end of the day.
That is great advice, to just do it and keep doing it.
Yeah.
I do want to ask a little bit about sort of the process of just writing and publishing a book. How did you get started? How did you get started and bring it to fruition and publish it? Like just any little kind of hints or how it went would be great.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my friend had come to me and told me that she did this program. She had gone through the program previously, and she said, I think you'd be a great candidate for this. And it's called the Creators Institute, and it's run by Dr. Eric Koester, I think is his name. But he is essentially a Georgetown professor. It was a Georgetown class. He got so much interest from it that he made it an online class. And I think now thousands of people have gone through the program, but it's honestly amazing. It's a initially 6-month program. He teaches you twice a week on Zoom for 3 hours. And I mean, it's very intense, but it's a great experience if you really want to write a book in a short amount of time. And they give you your editors and they help you. Honestly, it's a very seamless process. They set you up with all the editors, help you. They literally teach you how to write a book. They show you, okay, this is you have an idea, and then you're going to write little snippets, and then this is how you make these snippets into chapters, and it's really digestible for anyone. And you don't even have to be a writer. There's people who were you know, computer software engineers and just regular engineers, and who said, I don't write, and they wrote a book. So it's a great program. I 100% recommend it. And then I ended up doing hybrid publishing, which they also helped me out with. They basically set up the whole back end of Amazon, and they got my graphic designer. They did the whole formatting of the book, which I would not know how to do at all. So very grateful for that program. And if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to send them the details, because I can't speak highly enough about it.
And then getting it, even just getting it published and getting it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, they assisted with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously had to put in some of the information, but for the most part, they did like all of the legal stuff, all of the stuff that I definitely would not feel comfortable doing by myself. So it was great.
So it really is a very doable process thing.
Yes.
It sounds like, so like, you know, again, like talking yourself out of things, you know, but thinking where would I begin, and how would I get it published, and do I need an agent? How do you find a publisher? So
yeah, so they streamline it all, and it is kind of like another second job, I'm not gonna lie, but just because it is in such a short amount of time. But definitely recommend it if you can swing it.
So in the book, you shared about your struggles with depression and feeling, you know, shame and feelings of self-doubt, and the need for external validation, like you discussed here. And so I wondered, so writing the book and being so vulnerable and sharing, you know, these struggles, did that trigger some of that, or was it therapeutic, or really the fact that you were able to put this out there and publish it, is that sort of a sign that you're overcoming it? Like how did it, like, how was it for you, you know, like, you know, personally, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the above. I think, you know, it's like a healing process in itself, because I think when you're writing this, you don't actually, some of these thoughts, like, or feelings I had, like, I didn't fully process it, because there's a difference between, you know, thinking something in your mind and really writing it out on paper, at least for me. And so I think it was, you know, healing and cathartic, and it was also just me overcoming. And honestly, I feel like me publishing this book was like closing a big chapter of my life, just because I had experienced so much from like the age of 16 to like 23. And now I feel like, you know, I just turned 25, and I feel like I am in a completely new chapter of my life. And it's very, I guess, just like nice to know I've learned so many lessons, and that I can apply like whatever I go through in life now, like I have a great foundation of like lessons that I can lean back on.
That's great. I know you had mentioned that you had some great teachers at school, and Sarah Driscoll you mentioned in the book. What advice, this is a question from Jenny Treadway, but what advice would you give our graduating females as they head to college?
See, there's so many things I could say, and a lot of it I would say is cliche, but I think the cliche things are fairly true. And I would say it's really stay true to who you are, because I think a lot of times, especially what I've noticed, and when I talk to my friends who also went to PCS, we were a lot of times in a bubble, and in a great one too. We were able to express who we were. We were able to, you know, be like nerdy, I guess. A lot of people said, oh, you went to PCS, you were like the smart school, or whatever they say. But a lot of times I think in college, then you have a lot of opinions, obviously, like depending on where you go. For me, I joke, I said my college experience was like my like high school experience I never got, because it had, you know, the football, the sororities. It was 7,000 kids, which still isn't even that big compared to some colleges, but it was definitely an experience that I had never had before. And so I would say be very confident in who you are and use these next 4 years to also discover who you are and give yourself kind of grace in that, and knowing that perfectionism too it's not your friend, and it doesn't have to be your friend, and mistakes at the end of the day or failures are just lessons. And I don't really like to use the word failure ever, because I always believe that they're just a redirection into where you're supposed to go next. So that's probably just my bits and pieces of advice that I have for the graduating females, and honestly graduating everyone who's graduating.
Yes, yes. Well, that's fantastic advice. We can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us, and really for writing this book. It's, I think, really important, and your insights on being, unapologetically female in a man's world, I think is very, very timely, and something that we can all benefit from. So I appreciate that that during COVID, while other people were doing their sourdough starters, the overachiever wrote a book, but we all needed it. So I'm very grateful.
I know that I'm excited for my next book too. I don't know when that will happen, but I'm sure I'll have I'll be impulsive about it and just start writing. So.
Well, we won't hopefully have another pandemic, but you'll just still write it.
And in the meantime, we'll all try to give ourselves more grace. I love that that message, just giving yourself grace. It's so important.
Absolutely. Being your own cheerleader. I liked that too, where you said, like, you don't need to get it from someone else. Be your own best friend and cheerleader. So I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Sarah. On behalf of the PCDS and the whole Alumni Association, we truly appreciate it.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. Loved having this discussion, and so honored to be, talking with everyone, and hopefully people got a little something, had a little takeaway from today.
Yes. And so for all of you who are attending this, if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of Pretty Young, it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. This actually concludes all of our virtual events for the 2021-2022 academic year. And what a powerful way to conclude our offerings this year. Sarah, thank you so much for helping us to end on this note. And thank you, Steph, for facilitating the Q&A. We're just so appreciative and proud to have you as part of our alumni community, Sarah.
Of course. Well, thank you so much again for everything.
All right. Wish everyone a good evening and take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.